Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to part number 3 of Day 9 Daily 448, where we learn to be a better gamer. We're taking a look at MarineKingPrime, who's better than all of us. He said, honestly, there's no one better than MarineKingPrime right now, in my humble opinion, that's totally right on this one. Listen to me, he's so good, what the hell, he's incredible. He makes me salivate. Let's go ahead and hop back into the game. So that way none of my shame will show up back on the screen. All these Zerglings, all these attempts for the Zerg buddy to get any sense of vulnerability, pretty much not working out. And I actually think this move is pretty cool by DongRaeGu, this nice snaking, not just because it gets his Zerglings away, but because these Hellions are now preoccupied elsewhere. Back home, there's just such a small emphasis on the tank. There's just really nothing that you can't accomplish with 4s and 2 tanks that could be accomplished better by 6, 7, 8 tanks. For all intents and purposes. I think that that's probably the biggest danger to fall into with mech is the over-tanking and not enough thoring, because Thors are just damn good units. But, oh, this is like so annoying when this freaking stupid Overlord is here. Ugh. Ugh. And literally MarineKingPrime waits until like 12:30 to actually get an eBay. He hasn't seen anything, but again, notice the consistency. Before, we were saying things like, hey, at 10 minutes and 30 seconds, right, bink. So here's the 10-minute mark. If he started to see Mutalisks, he could start an eBay, then build turrets, and get away with 1 Thor. Here, he now is moving his Thors out on the map. There are no Thors back home to defend. So we may as well just start getting that anti-air defense up. So sexy, so sexy. MKP continuing to do damage. Make sure to check the upgrades, because that can always help reveal information. Banelings surprisingly good against Hellions, but only not moving Hellions. Again, MKP focused on the long term, getting this command center up, getting 2-2. A little bit more of an extended game, just because he's been unable to get his 3rd up, and because mech is just damn slow and leads to long games. But here is a moment that I think I was casting this game. I think that's me. I think I'm number 4, MLG cast. This moment surprised me more than anything. When MKP just immediately, upon losing a couple of Hellions, I think he still has a decent amount, yeah, he has 13 on the map, still went for 4 Hellions. He was like, screw Thors. I mean, in the Thor count, he has 4 Thors, 1 tank. I mean, I'm envisioning the gigantic army of Roaches coming out by surprise. A little bit hard to do, but still, I guess, theoretically a possibility. And MarineKingPrime, oh my gosh, to be caught with his pants down. And what I just said is less a truth and more of a fear that I think every meching player has. Certainly I have that fear when I'm meching, where I'm like, well, God, I can't over-Hellion, because what if he just kills off the Hellions, or just attacks me with Roaches and my Hellions can't do anything? But still, we see this delightful focus on map control that I actually think turns out to be much more effective than going a little bit too over-Thory. Which has to be a word, by the way. We still don't have the best sense of what our Zerg player is doing, but MarineKingPrime has focused nothing on scanning. Has focused all on mass mega muling, still getting more orbitals, no sort of planetaries, and once again moves out with a nice group of 11 Hellions while still having a lot on the map, 17. And there is the first big nab that I was just like, oh, this can't possibly be good. But remember, Zerglings are almost negligible if we are building this many Hellions. Not we win the game, but again, Zerglings are not nearly as big of a threat as other things are, because we're building so many Hellions, and still favoring more reactors. You can get away with having almost all Tech Lab factories at the end of the game, but MarineKingPrime instead opts to build a lot of Hellions, and I think this ends up being very key, keeping Zerg pinned back. constantly.
Upgrade complete.
Has suffered almost no direct attacks at the front. Goes straight for 3-3 right away. Almost ahead of Zerg, who's been doing nothing but upgrading all game long.
We could use some help here.
I talk a lot about intuitive responses, that if Mutalisk started to appear, we could easily go for some more turrets around. There's just light accounting for the fact that maybe there could be some air coming. One turret at each location, primarily the sensor tower, is the big one. And still shoving, and for the first time all game long, the Thors move down. Remember last game, how we saw the big moves down, the big moves back? Those happened right after 2-2 and 1-1 hit. Same thing with mech, we just didn't do 1 when we hit 1-1. Honestly, because we got it so ridiculously, insanely early. This can at the very least be annoying, but of course SCVs are way better than Infested Terrans. And this is where the big scans actually happen. Now, if you have an immobile army, I think it's easy to get a little bit too caught up in the death ball mode. If you have some Marine Marauder, it's easy to pull them back. But now, once we start seeing all these counterattacks that go on, MKP's heavy emphasis on Hellion, and you'll note 6 Hellions being made. We have 3 reactored factories churning out tons of Hellions. That actually ends up being a big benefit. And this is one of the big difficulties with mech is, you know, if you go into death ball mode, it's very difficult to pull this huge army back. But if you're going to go for these slow, big, clunky pushes that are hard to reinforce, you have to commit to it. Remember in the Marine Marauder game, how we pulled back and reinforced? It's so much more difficult to do. We are getting counterattacked, and we do have to account for that, but MKP is playing super unbelievably slowly and cautiously. In a sense, it's not even that MarineKing is just a really aggressive player, or a really this, or a really that. It's almost like he rolls a dice, whatever unit composition arrives on it, he says, what is the best way to perform with this unit? And then he just does that exactly, like so exactly. Last game, he rolled the Marine Marauder dice for the mid and late game, did a lot of pulling back, focused on keeping the expo count low. Here he has a way more mobile force, so once he moves out to attack, he's much more likely to do a little bit more committal stuff, trying to target fire the Ultralisks, because Thors are actually impressively good against Ultralisks. And once again we see Hellions controlling the map. This is weird. People never do this. They never do like 20 Hellions in the late game in production. 5-6 Hellions. A pair of Thors are there.
Mineral field depleted.
Looks a little bit grisly for MKP, but he is just not phased at all. Just keeping a good count on the expos. I believe that there's one over here, yeah. I suppose that's one little bit of a flub. Keeping an eye on the expansions is like the #1 thing you have to do with a slow army. But no matter what, these Hellions have just been absolutely incredible. They're just zoning. A little bit harder to do on a big map just because the floors are so good, but I've almost stopped doing a lot of in-depth commentary right now. Are you feeling that? Because I'm feeling this, and the reason behind it is that MKP just did such a good setup at the start of the game. With a lot of build orders, okay, we're at 20 minutes, 21 minutes right now. I'm thinking back to Pult, TSL Pult, who would do lots of cool transitioning at the start, but then delay his upgrades, and then transition to like Thor Viking against Broodlords, ignoring ghosts, and he'd sort of change how he set everything up. In battles, he wouldn't siege the tanks. MKP was so good at focusing on the late game that now he just has a killer late game. He has his upgrades done. He has 4 command centers out for bases. Pretty well defended. Sure, this one's taking damage from 2 Zerglings, but we're going to kill that off in a second. And all the rest of what he has to do is just smart army positioning. The build order was already brilliant.
Mineral field depleted.
Just going to do a little bit of snaking around. And There's some defensive snaking that you have to do, where you just defend a little this side, defend a little that side, take some damage. And you see this sort of seesaw motion back and forth and back and forth. And, oh, there's back and forth and back and forth. And the instant things slightly begin to let up, you can just do the big shove.
Our SCVs are under attack.
Still getting a little bit of pressure, and we can maybe kill this off. Yeah, we've kind of cleared everything out. But the Hellions that are so important on map control, I love the way that this looks. This moment right here is, I think, what's hard to do with mech in the late game. I'm going to come back to just this one moment. This is probably the only really big tactical thing I'll make a note on. So here we are, the MarineKingPrime cam. We want to generally attack down at these bases. He probably doesn't have this base up because, according to our vision, we just killed it. So how do we safely take a clunky, slow-ass army from here down to, say, here, where he probably has a base? And here, where he probably has some minerals left. How do we do that? Well, no need to theorize. We just look at MarineKingPrime style. The slow units are going to go straight down mid, and the Hellions are going to check the flanks. They're just going to monitor that. The rest of these units going straight, cutting straight down in mid. It's this nice broad area control. And the rest of these rally points, rally to the third. Thor's kind of in the middle to deal with this sort of stuff. But mostly that big slice across to the left allows this push to happen. And that's something that makes dual sight kind of a difficult map no matter what, these sort of weird sweeps that you have to do. But hey, you heard me talk about, well, it was weird to see him building so many Hellions, but now as he's building more and more and more and more and more, it becomes increasingly clear that he's needing these to do these sorts of sweeps all around the map. And by the way, Ultros are not good against Thors. Good game. Yeah. Yeah! MarineKingPrime! Again, for any of you looking for these replays, just look up MLG Columbus 2012 and you'll find the whole replay pack. But for now, we're going to take some questions before doing the After Hours Gaming League Consolation Finals. That is correct. That is not the third, fourth place match. These are the people that got knocked out of the tournament at step 1 and we felt kind of bad. Marquee. Yeah, there we go. I was just hopping into my question grabbing script. Yeah. The way the league format works, when the league starts, they're putting around robin groups and the top 2 from each group advance and the bottom 3 are just out of the running. But that doesn't seem very fun now, does it? We let them play all the way out until we can have the champion of the losers. Yeah. So, Night Wolfie says, Day 9, if DRG went for a Roach push, how would we defend with only Hellions? Which I assume means Hellions. Ah. Early Hellion pushes, interestingly, given what MKP did, is not very difficult to hold off. There's a couple of kinds of Roach pushes. There's the only Roach. Just going to build Roaches and rally across the map. When we see this, we'll obviously have to use our Hellions a little bit to do some like kiting, to do some burning action, but we're actually going to have something like 10 to 15 Hellions. We're going to have a pretty substantial amount of Hellions. Let me actually come back to this moment. Come on, screen. Yep, we're building our first 2 Hellions. Like right here, DRG hasn't even begun mining gas. Has a decent amount. If he had begun mining gas, maybe threw down a Roach Warren. Roach Warren probably going to be finishing up at like 6:30 or so, which means at 7 is when Roaches are really going to start popping out and advancing pretty aggressively for us. Maybe around 6:30 is about as early as they could end up popping out. But if we see that, we know 2 things. One, he just can't possibly have that many drones. Roaches are pretty expensive, especially in the early game. I should just say Roaches are expensive in the early game. You have a lot of larvae, and it's 75 minerals per roach, and they cost 2 food, which means you need to be building a lot of overlords. In other words, and the Roach Warren is 150 minerals. So the first big thing you know is that he's just totally screwed for drone count back home. And the second thing is that we have this mixture of buildings, even just I would move forward a minute, but in the replay you can only move forward 2 minutes at a time. But with this setup right here, we have a bunker. We can take all these SCVs, surround the bunker, build a single siege tank, leave the siege tank there, and then we have a stupid huge amount of Hellions, probably with blue flame, but even if we don't, it doesn't matter against roaches. So it ends up being not that difficult to hold off, but most importantly, it's pretty non-intuitive. And that's what's, I think, really interesting about MKP. It works because he gets his expansion up kind of fast, so he can afford 2 factories worth of stuff, which I really, really love. Yeah, Achilles of SC2. Day 9, in part 1, you said that MKP had his Zerg opponent pinned to a small box. Before I read the rest of the question, let me just note what that means. This is where you are playing aggressively enough and you are controlling the game flow enough to where he only has like 3-4 options as opposed to like 12 different options. For instance, if you are MVP and you're just expanding, defending, and not putting any pressure on Zerg, he can be doing anything. You have to have a generally good mix. But if you're like doing what MKP does and pushing right off the bat with a lot of Hellions and a lot of Banshees, he's forced to respond to both the threat of losing all his drones and the threat of having Banshees in there with Cloak. So that sort of forces him. So the second part that Achilles said is there a way for Protoss to do that to Terran or Zerg opponents? Every single race has the many ways that they can force their opponent into a small box of play. Here's a simple one that Protoss players can do to Zerg. Opening up air in any way. In any way at all. They have to build either Hydralisks or a lot of Queens or a lot of Spores. If they want to push across the map and do damage to you, they're going to need some kind of anti-air. Most generally, Hydralisks or Infestors will have to be part of that if it's a ground army. Mutalisks will pop out if it's an air army. And this allows us to work a little more cleanly. JYP will do this a lot. He'll just open up air, and then you know what he'll do with his Void Ray? Maybe kill some Overlords, and then just sit in the middle of the map. Just sit and hang out. And then JYP will take an expand and just go Colossus, Blink Stalker, Immortal, Sentry. Just a natural mixture. But he's forced his opponent into a small box. The opponent can't possibly move over without a lot of anti-air. And that costs a lot of time. And with that time, JYP can do interesting things. For Protoss to do that to Terran, yeah, sure. I'm going to build a decent number of Colossi early. You can't get away with just going like Marauder Marine Ghost. You're going to probably have to get a good amount of Vikings. So cool. You now know a certain set of what he can actually be doing. And a really common thing that we've seen Protosses do is open up with 3 Colossi as they take a third base, and then immediately go to Templar Tech and start building Immortals. And you'll see Terran players get 2-star ports, start churning out these medevacs 2 at a time, and then they have start churning out Vikings 2 at a time, and then they have like 14 Vikings. And your Colossi die, and then you win the battle with some Storms, Archons, and Immortals, and it's really nice. So the most basic thing is that, yes, how do you pin someone to a small box? Being aggressive, attacking a lot. The more you attack, the more you will feel your opponent is limited. And I don't mean that your opponent is in a bad spot, I just mean limited. If you're doing, for instance, mass zealot attacking, he's probably going to be limited to building largely only roaches in the early game and delaying his lair. He'll probably win, but again, notice how limited he is in his options. Notice how limited the Zerg is. Let's take 2 more questions, and then I'm going to step back. Ba-da-da-da-da-dum. Ba-da-da-da-da-dum. Rakrido says, Day 9, when does one make Hellions to the point where you overinvest? My nose is so itchy. Oh, yeah, that's great. Where you overinvest in map control. I'm so distracted by the itch on my nose. I'm so distracted. There's like a hair. There's like a little hair. Oh, it feels good. It's the simple pleasures in life. Some people are famous bankers, and they get yachts and hang out in the middle of the Mediterranean drinking whiskey. I scratch my nose. Oh, different lifestyles, man. Esports lifestyle. Okay, so let's talk about overinvestment in map control. There's two ways to look at it, and I don't know which way I like more, so anytime I'm in the situation, I apply both. One is, with every new set of Hellions that I make... Oh, and let me also note, all the analysis I'm about to say right now, I do in between games. I do after a game watching a replay, and I sort of think about it then. When I'm in-game, I'm not very good at making these decisions, and not a lot of people are, and that's totally okay, and that's totally fine. But with every 2 more Hellions that I make out of this reactor, I need to ask myself, is this actually accomplishing anything more? So, for instance, let's say I build... what is an example? How do I say that? Okay, so here's a standard example. Let's say he has a huge amount of defense at the front. Oh no, how? That's not a good example. What I'm saying is pretty simple, but for some reason I'm having trouble coming up with an example. A lot of times, why am I struggling so hard to come up with an example? This is the only one that I seem to be able to continue to come up with. It's like if you have Dark Templar coming to your base, and you build 1 turret for detection. If you build 2 turrets, it doesn't accomplish anything that the 1 turret hasn't already done with the detection. With the Hellions, you kind of have to be aware of like what categories can come at you, either roaches or a lot of zerglings. If you see the roaches, you need to ask, if I'm building 2 more Hellions, is this really helping my goal of map control? If I build another 2, is this still really helping? If a player is building a lot of zerglings and trying to be aggressive with me, then no, that's still such a terrible example. I almost want to stop and think about this. Overinvest in map control. When does that happen? For the mech circumstance, I guess I would say you're probably going to want to continue to make Hellions nonstop. You're either going to be against roaches, which are not so good for you, or you're going to be against any other ground mix, and the Hellions are great. Any other ground mix, Hellions are amazing against, except like Ultralisks. So in that case, I think the map control is going to be just fine. When can we overinvest in map control? Okay, so the shitty answer, as you can tell as I'm stumbling through it, the horrible first part is this incremental question. I have 6 Hellions. If I build 8 Hellions, is it really going to help contain him all that much more? If I've seen him largely focusing on Zerglings, yeah, it probably will help. Cool. Thankfully, I have a second answer. The other thing I always ask myself is, what is my overall goal? I mean, MarineKingPrime, in game number 1, built Hellions and Banshees. So that way he could get a 3rd, and he could get his double engineering bay up. Ding! My goal is to buy time to do those things. Once they've been started, and I can now go back to producing other units, seems good. So to use a non-MarineKingPrime style, Bomber builds 4 Hellions, and then goes for Fast 3 Command Center, and then just goes Marine Tank Medevac, just straight up. So he uses the Hellions to get map control, and the instant he has some map control and has some semblance of safety, he's already accomplished his goal of getting the 3 command centers up and started, and then going back to the Marine and tank production. I feel like that answer is only like 60% satisfactory. I feel like I don't have a nice, clean thing that I can come up with on the spot. I can actually say right now, I'm just going to describe my thought process, and hopefully that'll be useful. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry to DongRaeGu, who asked an excellent and pivotal question. And I can't quite seem to poop out the answer. There's a number of things I'm thinking of. One is, how much map control do I need? If I'm building a lot of late-term, long-term stuff, I don't really need that much map control. So, I'm trying to think of what it would be for the other races. You know, like in PvP when players go Phoenix to get some map control up. Or here's a better example. In Protoss vs. Terran, Protosses who build Blink Stalkers first to get map control, and then they start going Storm and Zealot Archon and all that sort of stuff. I mean, if you have 15 Blink Stalkers, it accomplishes the exact same thing as 8 Blink Stalkers. He has to pull back to defend to make sure that he's going to be okay. So that's one thing I'm thinking of, is like, is it really damage you're trying to do? If it's damage you're trying to do, obviously you want more. If it's just control of the space you want, you actually can probably stop at some point. This last game I think is a little bit weird because the Hellions are just so useful in the Ling Baneling fights. In the first game, it was just... If you're going to go Marine Marauder, I think more than... If you're going to go, excuse me, Marine Tank Medevac, I think more than 10 is probably like way nuts. Like, you're going absolutely crazy. You should actually probably be attacking with the Hellions if you're getting that many. 8 is a lot, and I think MKP did it cleverly. I'm just gonna stop. I'm just gonna stop. I can't get a clear, clean answer. It's so hyper ridiculously situational. I broke. I thought there were like too many thoughts happening, and they didn't coagulate into a thing. So that's the end of the daily. Woo! All right, now keep in mind, I'm not done yet. I have to do this cast, the After Hours Gaming League. You know what? Kanaya says pretty much just build what you need to accomplish your goal. That's a really succinct way to put it, but I'm trying to see if there's any way to push more subtlety in there. Oh, that's so cool. Okay, so here's something that I just want to throw out there that's kind of random, but anytime I hit one of those things where I'm like, oh, how the hell? That is when I get like my happiest, and I spend like 9 hours churning on something. This is how I ended up majoring in math, is when I really just don't know. That's when I am the most like, how do we do that? That's why I had so much fun with Last Shadows TVP. There were 2 or 3 things that really confused me, and I was just like, oh, what? God. Always remember, here is the most important rule of game design. Remember, the most important rule for game designers is to create inefficiency. Their goal is to make it inefficient. Their goal is to make it hard and confusing and difficult. But most notably, the word is inefficient. Inefficient is the big word. Consider golf. You are trying to place a ball into a hole in the ground. You know what's the most efficient way to do that? It's to pick the ball up and to just plop it down into the hole. That's the most efficient way to do that. But you know how golf is played? In the most inefficient way possible. You stand 400 yards that way, and then you have this stick that you have to like hit from like a far way away, and you can only do it a couple of times before you get marked as a loser, right? It's this incredibly inefficient, difficult process. So, anytime you beautiful, brave souls are up against something that just seems hard and seems unclear, that's what the whole fun of games is about. It's just so much lack of clarity of what you should do. And that interestingness of decision making is why I still continue to do the daily after 448 episodes. Ha! I'm done. Alright, stick around because the After Hours Gaming League is going to begin in 10 minutes. Oh!